Welcome back to another episode of Be the Number. I am Tee Off Sports, and I'm joined by my co-host, former Division I golfer out of the University of Kentucky, Josephine Chang. Josephine, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing well. How have you been?
I've been doing well. It's been a really hot run for me these last couple weeks in the outright market. I had Kisner at the Wyndham, I had Finau at the Northern Trust, and then I had Cantlay last week at the BMW Championship. So, let's start there with that. That was quite the spectacular finish with that tournament, with the way it went with it. And, DeChambeau probably should have made some of those putts down the stretch. But what were your thoughts about the tournament?
Truly, I just thought that the way that it played out, it did make sense. I know that we kind of said that everyone might be kind of going towards Bryson just with his length off the tee, and obviously he did take advantage of that and just missed some of those shorter putts. But I thought that playoff was phenomenal just to watch. I only got to watch like reruns and obviously Cantlay's last putt. Didn't really follow the tournament too much, but I thought overall it was just a great tournament. I personally didn't do too well with my lineup, again, sadly, but I think I'm slowly figuring it out.
Yeah, as you said with Cantlay, that was just a phenomenal effort from him, and I'm excited to see him in future Ryder Cups. He kind of has that killer mentality to him, and Bryson's very clutch in his own right, and I know some of those putts didn't drop, and he kind of keeps having these problems late in the tournament, but I said this on my Twitter Saturday night, but if you're making in-tournament head-to-head bets or playing DFS Showdown, you need to be very careful in changing the script on players you liked pre-event, and I saw a lot of people discussing Cantlay about why he was a fade after the first round or even after the second round. And I think that was a massive mistake. And like when I do my in-tournament model for Rotoballer, the one thing I always incorporate is the in-tournament research back into the fray with it. Because yes, you're trying to find guys that, my big thing is, I'm trying to find guys that are good ball strikers where maybe they had a bad day putting and we can find a hot day on the greens with them. But Cantlay didn't really fall into that narrative that a lot of these guys do. He was top 10 in the tournament in ball striking. He was making putts, but everybody was making putts during the tournament. Like, yes, he gained 14.6 with his flat stick, but Bryson gained 9.4 himself. So it's not like we were getting one guy that was just going crazy with the putter and not doing anything else. I thought Cantlay played really well. We talked about it a little bit on the show last week with the way I built my model and the way you built your model also. He had a good GIR percentage. He's a good bunker player. He was the number one player in the model in par 4 scoring. So I think there was just a lot going in his direction. And as you said with Bryson, he was always going to be able to use his length to an extent to find success, but the around the green game kind of punished him when it mattered most. And then the putting just went ice cold in a lot of situations. Like even earlier in the week on Friday, he had that putt for 59 and couldn't make it from less than 10 feet. So it's kind of the story for his week, unfortunately, with that. But let's move forward into the Tour Championship. So it's at East Lake, 7,350 yards, par 70, Bermuda grass. Final 30 of the FedEx Cup race are here, with perhaps Patrick Reed being the exception as he continues to battle bilateral pneumonia. At this moment right now, Reed is currently scheduled to be playing. He's not on DraftKings pricing. Keep an eye on it. If he doesn't get put on the pricing and if he doesn't make it into the tournament, it's not going to matter as much for DraftKings, but I kind of have a hard time believing he's going to play. Josephine, you and I were talking before we went on air. I'm not 100% sure if he has to tee up to actually get his money this week of the $400,000. I wouldn't think that that's the case with it because he earned it throughout the whole year, but he is turning down a lot of free money by not coming to these events if otherwise on it. But in 2019, the PGA Tour adopted this new staggered start that we have where number one in the race tees off at 10 under, and we gradually move each player back from there. This goes all the way to 26 to 30 starting at even. So before I kick it to Josephine for her course breakdown, I do want to elaborate a little bit about how difficult it is to come from behind. Of the last 45 tournaments I've tracked, only 4 have featured an eventual winner that has come from 6 or more strokes behind. That would be Dustin Johnson, who came 9 back at the 2020 Travelers, Rahm from 8 at last year's BMW, Rory at the Wells Fargo a few months ago also made up 8 shots, and Thomas recovered 6 at the Players this year. I get that we aren't to the point yet with round 1 not even underway, but the BMW and Travelers yielded more unique scoring than a course like East Lake will. If you're looking for optimism, the wins from Rory and JT show it's possible, but East Lake is a hard venue to make up ground. And, even if we're looking at this, not only are they the elite of the elite, but it's happening under 9% of the time in my model. So with Rom, Thomas, Dustin. Like these are the guys that's who you would expect to be doing that. But and by the way, that's more of a betting answer than a DFS answer of over anything with this. Like that's more if we're looking at the outright betting market than DFS. But we can discuss that a little bit more when we get to the board here. But Josephine, we are back at another Donald Ross design. What are you looking for from a statistical perspective?
So obviously I've never really looked at the course until I started doing some research. Thankfully they had some like drone flyovers again that I could look at. I'm not sure what it is, but this course doesn't seem to play into that Donald Ross narrative as much as other courses have. I mean, yes, there's the undulating greens, but they do seem slightly bigger on the bigger side than Donald Ross courses normally are. And on top of that, I feel like, yes, some of the fairways are kind of narrow and it does give you a benefit to hit it to a certain part of the fairway off the tee. But I almost feel like this course, you don't have to be as accurate with your driver to set yourself up and give yourself a good birdie chance and good look at approach into the green. And so typically, just for this course, I decided to look at first and foremost approach shots. I just feel like a lot of these holes where these pins can be, it's really going to need a player who's really dialed in, really knows their numbers. And obviously with the top players coming to this course, that's almost everyone. So I looked at just shots gained with approaches. That was probably one of my highest weighted stats. And then I looked at driver distance and accuracy again, as well as the ability just to make birdies with a no cut field. And obviously trying to like chase players and make your way up the leaderboard, you're going to want to make a lot of birdies. But I think overall, I truly am looking just at recent performance coming into this tournament, where that confidence level is at, where their game seems to be, and built my model just off of those.
Yeah, like, one of the things is, and this is what I don't like about the FedEx Cup race in general, 3 tournaments seem to decide a lot, and guys that have the best form are the ones that seem to be finding success, to actually be able to win the Tour Championship with it. I don't love how they jack up the points. Like when you think about it, Rahm should probably be number 1 entering this tournament. And I don't think a win from Finau and Cantlay should thrust them to number 1 and 2 on the list with it. So there has to be a better way to do it. I don't really have an answer. Like my biggest thing would be maybe you could play match play with it, where if you're in the advantage, you get a couple more buys than everybody else. But the problem with that is, as much as those guys would be playing extra golf, they also might be getting into form. So there's really not a good solution with it. The other thing you mentioned is there are going to be more narrow fairways, and the greens are a little bit bigger than you would expect for a Donald Ross course. There is undulation. Donald Ross and undulation will always go together at the end of the day. So, that's something I looked at. But as I mentioned previously, Eastlake isn't the birdie fest type track that we keep getting year over year or tournament after tournament on all these other courses that we're playing. The winning score recently has been between 11 to 15 under, but there are a lot of challenges that will make golfers earn their paydays. As we were just talking about, we talked about Ross and the undulating greens. You definitely are going to get some of that here. The greens have shaved runoffs, and you are going to need to miss to the correct quadrant. I think you can putt from most of these if you choose that route. Some combination of 3-putt avoidance and strokes gain around the green should be looked at. There are 74 bunkers and 6 water hazards. The par 4s have a solid mixture of being short to long. The par 70 nature gives us 12 of them, so I am weighing it, although I am more of a proponent of par 5s than most here. Yes, we only have 2 of them, but they have historically been vital to score at. Rory gained 53% of his scoring total there in 2019, as well as Dustin being able to maintain his head start by posting a nearly 55% of his weekly scoring output there. So from a statistical perspective, I weighted 7 categories this week. Of the ones I mentioned to some length a second ago, I have par 5 birdie or better percentage for 12.5%, and I remade a par 4 plus bogey avoidance stat for 10%. I did strokes gain total Bermuda for 15%, as well as strokes gain total Donald Ross for 20%. I went heavy on those because I wanted to find golfers that enjoy a short test, or this sort of test, 10% on a mixture of 3-putt avoidance around the green and sand save percentage. Essentially, this is for some safety to be added to the model. I have 15% on accuracy plus off the tee. The tour average sees 62% of fairways hit At East Lake, that total drops to 54%. The fairways are relatively small, but the Bermuda rough can be thick and nasty. You don't have to look any further than what Rory did at this course last year. It went viral on the thing. He had a second shot. He was in the rough, tried to carry the water, topped the ball 2 inches in front of himself, and it trickled right into the water. So if you miss fairways, I do think it's going to come in and bite you. And then I wrapped it up with GIR plus strokes gain approach over the previous 24 rounds for 17.5%. I want players bringing good form to the table recently with their irons and guys who can hit a lot of greens. But that's where I'm at this week. It sounds like you and I are more or less on the same mindset of how this is going to play. I think Donald Ross Designs, as you said, this might be a little bit different than some of the other courses we're used to. It's a difficult course at the end of the day. It's not going to be the birdie fest that we're used to with it. But let's move forward into the DraftKings slate and try to break this down. And we're going to do it a little bit differently this week. We are going to go through, I guess, all 29 players right now. Patrick Reed, we'll just assume for the sake of this that he's not going to play. If something changes, you can obviously dive into it a little bit more. Just as a quick stance on it, he's been in the hospital. I think that that's a rough thing to try to go and be in the hospital for 2 weeks. I'm sure he's a little bit weaker and then try to go play this event. So I don't really know if I could find myself to read in any standpoint with this, but let's start with this $11,000 and up range. So we have Patrick Cantlay at 13,400. John Rahm at 13,000, Bryson DeChambeau at 12,300, Tony Finau at 11,800, and Justin Thomas at 11,000. Where's your mind at for this?
Yeah, so out of these top 5, 4 of them are in the top 10 for me based on my model. Only one that wasn't was Tony Finau, which I think is simply because I was looking a lot at kind of just the ability to make birdies. And obviously you talked about how it's not going to be a birdie fest here, but just with the way you have a staggered leaderboard, it's something that you do have to look at. And so just based on his stats, based on just how he plays his game, he doesn't really take advantage of par 5s as much, which, as you mentioned earlier, there's only 2, but it's going to be a vital part of their scoring here at this course. But obviously he's second player. He's only 2 back from Cantlay. And so I don't really agree with my model here. I think anyone in this top 5 has a good chance of winning just because playing golf and knowing how leaders go into the last round, just from a college standpoint, our games aren't at the point of a PGA Tour player, but even going into the last day, if you're 5-6 strokes behind, it's usually a little harder to catch up. But at this level, I think it makes it even harder. And so I was going into it thinking, okay, maybe people who are starting off maybe 4 strokes behind have a chance to really go after and win. So that's everyone here in the first 5. I obviously really do like Cantlay. Confidence with winning last week coming into it, and he has the biggest lead. So it's just something to think about. He is the most expensive, so how is that going to affect everyone else that you're picking? With John Rahm, he was actually ranked first based off my model, and I definitely think that just with his ability to make birdies on par 5s, he can give a good run at it, even though he is 4 strokes behind. And then with Bryson and JT, I think that they both, Bryson obviously being the longest hitter, can definitely take advantage of some of the shorter par 4s and par 5s and make a good amount of birdies. As for Justin Thomas, I think his approach game is starting to get dialed in, and I think he's been pretty solid this season. So I feel pretty good about him. He has a history of playing well on this course, and his game's been going in a positive direction. So truthfully, I think all 5 of these players have a very good chance of being able to win. And it's really, really hard for me to narrow down who I really like.
Yeah, and just to touch base on where these players are starting, because it is important. Cantlay's at 10 under. He will be in the lead, as Josephine just said. John Rahm is at 6 under, so he will be 4 back. Bryson is at 7 under. He will be 3 back. Finau at 8 under will be 2 back. And then Thomas is kind of the outlier here at 4 under. He will be 6 back. I kind of agree with you in the mindset of there's a reason why these guys are up at the top here. And let's start with Cantlay, and I will run down the board from there. So Cantlay at $13,400. I think if you're using the regression argument to fuel Cantlay as a fade, and that would be the regression of the putting that we saw last week, as I mentioned previously in the show, I think that's where the flaw is going to come in. Now, there are realistic stances we can take for why the result might not be worth the $15 million Cantlay is hoping to get. But I can't really get behind him, gaining 14 shots, and that's why you're not going to take him this week. He was a top 10 ball striker at the BMW, and that was a putting contest for all intents and purposes for that. My concerns come more because of a handful of other reasons. In his 3 times at East Lake, Cantlay has fired 9 over, 1 over, and even par. That's a surefire way to open up the board for everyone beneath him. And anything that comes close to mimicking those 3 performances will assuredly end his chances of being the season-long winner. He's in the bottom tier on Bermuda. He has historically been the worst Donald Ross player in this field, which most of that stems from the course that he's playing this week or early in his career at the Wyndham. But he's only gained strokes total here in 4 of his 12 rounds. I'm curious to see where his ownership ends up being projected for massive MME contests, because he is the leader. He is at 10 under par. I think that that's at least worth noting. And if he fires, something like 5 under, 6 under, he's going to take a lot of players out of this tournament. But there are real red flags present. And I think in single entries, I'm actually going to look the other way here. There are stats that you can get behind. Like I mentioned previously, he's the number 1 par 4 scorer. You would think this venue would be a really good setup for him statistically, but it just hasn't ever come to fruition with him here. And I think there's other routes that you can potentially go. I mean, he's 14.5% with all these other guys being 20% or more. So if you want to leave it at that, sure, an MME contest, I think you can fit him into there. But as I said, single entry, things of that nature, probably I will be passing on him. John Rahm at 13,000. I don't think this is a unique take by any means here, but Rahm feels like the perceived favorite, even with the deficit that he faces to start. I guess the only thing lacking from his potential is that he's finished between 6th and 13th when we remove starting totals in all 4 of his starts. But this is the best version of him we've seen. He's going to be 35%. But I mean, at this point, I think Rahm's the best player in the world, and I think he's showing it. Bryson at 12,300. East Lake has been a grind for DeChambeau over the years. He has tallied totals of 4 under, 1 under, and 1 over in his 3 attempts. And his 1 over total last year can probably be chalked up to his erratic ways off the tee. As I mentioned previously, rough is really penal here. I think that probably hurt him a little bit last year. That was more of the version of him that's the bomb and gouge Bryson than the years before that. I would say his range of outcomes are probably more steep than anybody else in this field. I think there's a chance for blow up, and I think there's a chance that he gets hot, and he's only 3 shots back. So I do think you can make an argument for him in GPPs. I would want to avoid him like the plague, I guess, in cash games, just because I don't know what I'm going to get from him. But at 20%, it makes some sense. And then I'm going to skip Tony Finau for a second and talk about Thomas at 11,000. So Thomas is actually one of the guys that we discussed that has made up that difference that he needs to overcome. He had that 6-shot deficit at the Players after 3 days. We're not even at that point yet. He's still going to get around before we get there with that. But he hasn't finished outside of 9th here since 2016 and has multiple double-digit events at this tournament of 11 under par or better. I think maybe they were both 11 under par, but at least 11 under par with it. So I agree with what you said. I think Thomas's irons are turning around. I think Thomas has a chance to make a run at this from far back. And I think of the guys that are, I guess, beyond 5 under par, I do understand why he's at 11,000 compared to the rest of the guys. I think his upside can shoot through the roof with this. So I do like Thomas in GPPs. He's going to be 33% owned, but anytime you have a no cut, that seems to be where he thrives. And then, so I want to talk about Finau, and I mentioned it last week, and I'm going to mention it again this week. My model doesn't necessarily feel this way. My model did not like anything about Finau this week, and I was kind of surprised with that. But when you look at what he's done here, 7 under, 4 under, 4 under, and 3 under total since 2017. I think he can handle the property. We know his around the green game is good. We know historically he's been a good off the tee player. Now he's not an accurate off the tee player, but if he can post a total, he needs to have a number in mind that he thinks he can get to. And maybe 8 under is not quite the number, which would put him at, if he shoots, I guess I'd put him at 16 under. I don't know if that necessarily is enough to get him the win. When we're looking at it, 11 to 13 under seems to be the total that people shoot. So if let's just say it's 12 under par and he gets to 16 under, somebody shoots 12 under at 4 under, it puts them in a tie. I think he can just take a lot of people out of the equation if he puts in a 7, 8 under par type finish here. But when I looked at this, when I took the average finish from somebody and the projected total, my model had Tony Finau winning. That was the one thing it did like with him. As you mentioned, the par 5 scoring, not good. The par 5 scoring is what's holding him back. But I think that if you can turn that around a little bit and he scores on the par 5s, and there's only 8 during the week, so he's a long hitter. Maybe he hits a couple more fairways during those. Maybe he makes a couple more birdies than you anticipate him making, and he birdies, 5 or 6 of them. All of a sudden, like, he's 5 under through those 8 holes, and he really only needs to get to maybe 3, 4, 5 more under to win the Tour Championship. So I think he has a logistical chance to actually find the winner's circle here. At 20%, I think that it's worth taking a chance, but from a statistical perspective, I'm having the same problems you were having with it. I don't know if you want to say anything to that.
No, I was truly just really confused. I didn't understand why my model don't like him, and that was truly going to be my question for you. So I'm glad that you already answered it.
Where is Finau on your model?
He's 17th for me.
Yeah, and he's 14th for me. He's 10th from a safety perspective, which is part of that being the score that's built in with it. But statistically, he was only 23rd, and that's really where the scary part comes in with him on it. And for par 5 scoring, well, let's start with Bermuda. He's 24th on strokes gained total on Bermuda. He's been good on Donald Ross designs, which is why he's had success here, but 22nd in my model on par 5 birdie or better percentage. So that's really what he's going to need to turn around if he wants to win the tournament. I think he has enough length to do it, but there's always the concern if he doesn't, he falters, and then all of a sudden, he's out of the tournament and doesn't have a chance to win. So let's move down to these next 5 players here. So we have Dustin Johnson at 10,700, Jordan Spieth at 10,400, Cameron Smith at 10,100, Abraham Answer at 9,600, and Rory McIlroy at 9,300. Where do you like in this range?
Yeah, so I was texting Spencer earlier, and I was like, hey, I'm running a little behind. And I was like, I seem to be liking everyone. And then I said, but I feel like these next couple of players, I might have to ding a little bit. And so these are the 2 players I was actually talking about. So Dustin Johnson and Jordan Spieth. So for DJ, I just said that I wasn't really sure how I felt about him. My model doesn't like either one of these players too much. And for Dustin Johnson especially, so he's had phenomenal rounds here, but he's also had his good share of really tough rounds. And with that said, like, he's put up a really good performance last week. He had a lot of birdies, a lot of birdie opportunities. But overall, I just don't feel like he's the best iron player, and I feel that's someone that you need to play well here. As for Jordan Spieth, again, I just think he's too sporadic right now. We had moments of like prime Jordan Spieth the last couple of weeks. Obviously, that 62 in round 2 at the Northern Trust and his 66 last week. But then you've also had rounds where he's a lot over par and he's just spraying it off the tee, and that's just something you really can't do on this course. So just for these 2 guys, I wasn't a big fan. My model wasn't a big fan, and I could kind of see why. For Cameron Smith, so he's only 5 back. He's starting at 5 under, and I feel as though he is one of those players that can really get hot, and he can start to make birdies and move his way up a leaderboard. And there's short par 5s and par 4s that he can take advantage of. So he is someone that I'm kind of looking at. And then for Answer, my model didn't really like him. I don't really have much to say about him. He was someone I was going to ask you about. And then for Rory, are we ending at Rory? Is that where
we're going to end at Rory, and then we'll go lower after that.
Okay, perfect. So for Rory, he has a good history here. My model likes him. He's actually graded as my top 2 player. Yeah, he's second. I don't really think he has the ability to win just because he's starting at 2 under. He's 8 strokes back. But I do think he's the caliber of player that has a lot of ability just to move up this leaderboard, especially with where his game is at lately. So I just think even though his ownership percentage is so high, I think he's someone in the $99,000 range that if I have that money to spend, he's someone I'm definitely going to be looking at.
Let's start with Rory. I think that's a good place to leave it off here. As you said, he's dominated East Lake in his career, but it's not going to come without major pushback. We're looking at about 40% ownership right now. Ownership doesn't matter in cash games. Play him there. I don't have a problem. $9,300 is a very good price for him. He's also number 3 in my model. That's a positive to look at with that too. But I kind of lean towards biting the bullet and avoiding him in any of those MME contests. I think single entries and things of that nature can be discussed further, but you need to find a way to create leverage in a field like this. And a golfer that's 8 shots back, like Rory is getting the full benefit of the doubt because of what he's done at this course in his career. And I understand that. And that's fine. You can give him that. Like, I'd almost just rather him be like $11,000 though, so somebody had to make a decision with it. If you're 8 shots back, like there's real problems that could happen. Like if 40% of people are taking him and you get bad Rory that shows up, which is possible. Rory's doing this like once or twice around at every single tournament where he's posting like, 75, 77s, numbers that are coming out of left field with it, that I don't think you can have that happen here. And if you're 8 back, you might run into a problem. Like my model likes him. And this is more of just like a leverage type play in big tournaments than anything else with it. But you kind of have to take a stance, and I feel like fading Rory might be one of those spots to do it. Now, the problem is I don't love this whole range in general. Johnson at 10,700, I do think the par 70 suits him better because of his issues with par 5, but 22 to 23% feels like a lot for someone that also isn't in 100% form like Rory is. I think that's a problem that you could potentially have. Yes, he gained 3.4 shots off the tee last week, which is exceptional, but he lost 1.6 with his irons. It continues to be one thing or another that derails his tournament. So kind of the same thing with Rory there. The ownership's not going to be as extreme, but my model did not like him either. I had him 19th overall. Where did you have him?
22nd.
Yeah, so we're in the same range with that. Jordan Spieth at 10,400. I think the intrigue that you can find around Jordan is just the ownership percentage. And I'm curious to see where this goes to, because if you can get a sub 15% version of him, my model has him 24th overall. So it's really bad for Jordan with it. But the thing is, and I was texting you this before we went on air, Jordan's the type of guy that can get hot and make birdies in bunches and can go and, shoot a 62, or he won't do that at Eastlake's a more difficult course, but it doesn't mean he can't go shoot a 65 and all of a sudden put himself back in this tournament. For that reason, I don't mind taking a shot on him in GPP contests if you decide to go down that route. I kind of prefer going with Cameron Smith if I'm going to do that, though, at $10,100. As you were mentioning with him, I'm kind of starting to get this idea with Smith that he is this volatile golfer that has an ability to like really compete when he is on. We've seen it at WGCs. We saw it at the Masters a couple go-arounds ago. When he gets himself into contention, he can really go and make birdies. He's number 1 in my model in par 5 birdie or better percentage and 3 putt percentage. I think he can carve out a reasonable score. Of these guys 5 under par or better, he's the one that's going to theoretically probably carry the least amount of ownership. And even where we see him priced at $10,100, he has a chance to win this tournament. And I think at 16%, you can at least fill him in for GPPs. Like, of all these guys, he's probably my preferred GPP play. And then Answer at 9,600. We've talked about it on the show a lot recently. Answer's a player that hits a ton of greens in regulation. I just don't love his upside. And I know I've said this, and I know he's just won a tournament recently, so it's kind of counterintuitive to say that, but most of what Answer does is he gives you that top 10, top 12, top 15 finish. He's kind of safe. I think I'd rather, in a no-cut tournament where there's only 30 players, shoot for maximum upside with it. I think I'd rather play Answer for cash for that reason. I think Rory for cash, and I will probably sprinkle in Cam Smith into GPPs. He's really the one I want the most exposure to. I'm not going to talk anybody out of Jordan Spieth. I think that makes some sense also, but where was he on your model, Spieth?
So Dustin Johnson and Jordan Spieth were both 22nd on my model.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, like, so Spieth is 24th, 25th for upside, 23rd for safety, but I just think with him, one of the problems is there have been some injury concerns that have been kind of floating out there. That worries me a little bit, but I just think his game, he is an elite around the green game. His short game is as elite as it can be. If he gets hot with the putter, you never know what could happen. So that's more of just a leverage play if I can get him at the right ownership number. As you said, off the tee is going to matter a lot. So if he starts spraying the ball, this could be a long tournament for him. But yeah, I mean, there's not much for me here. Cameron Smith is probably my favorite play of the group. But let's move into this next section, which has a lot of players that I like. And I could probably say something positive about all these guys. But we have Xander Schauffele at 8,900, Harris English at 8,700, Sam Burns at 8,500, Colin Morikawa at 8,300, Victor Hovland at 8,000, Brooks Koepka at 7,800, Louis Oosthuizen at 7,600, and Sungjae Im at $7,300. So I'm going to start with this range this go around just because I do have a positive thing to say about pretty much everybody here. So let's start with Xander. So Xander's going with that same thing that Rory has this week of elite course history. Didn't win the tournament last year, but technically won it according to the official world golf rankings. So Dustin gets credited with the $15 million win. Xander had the round of the tournament at 15 under par. He gets the points for coming in first for that. So in my model, I gave him first place finish from that. But in his trips here, 15 under par, 12 under par, 10 under, 5 under. So those are the 4 results, the times he's teed it up at East Lake. I think he possesses a little bit more upside than somebody like Rory. And I just think because we're getting him for cheaper and the ownership percentage is marginally less, like we're still talking about a 31% owned golfer, but I do like Xander in these no-cut tournaments. I think he possesses upside to find success there. I would rather go with him over Rory. And the one thing I will say is I really do not like going both Rory and Xander. Like if you're inclined to play Rory, I wouldn't start with a 40% owned guy and a 31% owned guy and try to go that way. They're both 8 shots back at the end of the day. It's going to be difficult to make a run at this and actually win it. And I just think there's other places you can go. I like Harris English a lot at $8,700. He's gained in his last 9 events around the green and 6 of his last 7 with his irons. This has kind of been a resurgent year for him. I think he's a good pivot away from Rory. If you want to go that route, he's going to be 17%. Sam Burns at 8,500. Burns is an elite par 5 scorer that can make birdies in bunches. I do think there are options I like better for similar ownership, but he makes some sense, especially for cash games. Morikawa, I would say he's GPP only because of the injury concerns. He's been really bad these last couple weeks since winning the Open Championship. If there is an injury problem, I worry a little bit. 15% ownership means he does come into play for GPPs. He ranks 7th in my model. I'm going to just keep monitoring the news on him. I said that last week, didn't end up getting to him. Maybe this week something changes with it, but the guy I like beneath him, which is maybe the reason why I won't get to him, Victor Hovland at 8,000. So up to this point, Rahm, Thomas, Xander, English, and Morikawa are the only golfers that are considered values when looking at both my model versus DK pricing and model versus ownership rank. And then Hovland would be the next name to add into that line there. The short game continues to spiral, but he's averaging 5.08 strokes off the tee plus approach over his last 4. I think this is a good buy low spot for him. And I'm actually going to stop there. Let's just go through Xander, English, Burns, Morikawa, and Hovland. What are your thoughts on those guys?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to start at Hovland because he was someone that I really liked in this range. And I just said that he seems to be just a very steady player. He doesn't make a lot of mistakes and he can take advantage of shorter holes. And he seems to he seems to convert a lot of birdies when they matter. And I think also that his approach game, his iron game is probably one of the best in this range. And so he's going to give himself a really decent look at a lot of birdies with, I think it was like a 68 or 69% green and regulation percentage. So just something that I really like to look at. So he was probably my favorite one here out of this range. And then, as you said with Colin Morikawa, he just, I didn't really know about the injuries, or if I did, I forgot. But I just knew that like his form isn't where it was at earlier in the season. And so I think just with how well he played earlier, it's skewing his stats a lot with just how he's been playing recently. So my model ranked him in the top 10, but I don't like where he's at personally. And then with Sam Burns, I think we talked about him last week just being a really volatile player, being able to make a lot of birdies. And so that was someone I was kind of looking at just because he can maybe move up the board starting at 4 under. But I wasn't sure. I haven't made a solid decision on him yet. With Harris English, so he's actually 10th in my model. And I didn't think he was that great of like an iron player to be able to like really contend. But I also don't know as much of his history as you probably do and just how well he's been playing. So that was someone I wasn't really sure about in this range. And then as for Xander, I mean, I was blown away by how well he's played here over the last few years. I don't think he's going to be able to really like give himself a chance just because he's starting at that 2 under number. but definitely like 8,900 has the potential to move up the leaderboard. So I kind of liked him, but definitely you're just going to have to play around a lot with pricing and just how small this leaderboard is when you're like trying to figure out your lineup. So I guess my model really likes all these players. I really like all these players. I'm just going to have to make a decision when it comes down to it and pick someone, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is like ownership and pricing are the two things to look at. I think that there's just certain builds that make more sense with other ones. As I said, like I don't think going Xander and Rory is a great start to a build. I think you can go Xander and Harris English though. I think you can go guys where like you have the one super big ownership guy and you fill him in with a guy like Harris English that's not going to be quite as much. Like the thing is nobody's going to be uber chalk or uber not chalk, I guess, with it is what I'm trying to say. Like all these guys are carrying about 15% ownership, even like the low end guys with this. So you're going to have to pick and choose spots and people that you like with it. But yeah, as far as Hovland goes, like Hovland's one of my preferred players too, just because I think if the around the green stuff turns around, he's an elite ball striker. He's elite with his irons. He's elite off the tee. I think those are really good things. With Harris English, the irons leave something to be desired for sure, but he's so good around the green that he's a lot of times can salvage that, hits a bunch of fairways. So I think if you're hitting a bunch of fairways and, he's just not making disaster of numbers out there, he can find success also. But let's wrap up these last three guys and then we'll go down into like these bottom tier guys. So we have Brooks Koepka at 7,800, Louis Oosthuizen at 7,600, and Sungjae Im at 7,300. Where are you at in this section?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been loving on Sungjae Im, and I still am. I'm a huge fan of his right now. He's playing great golf, he's making a lot of birdies. Driving accuracy is at 70%, combined with a 69% green regulation percentage. So he's just looking at a lot of birdie opportunities. And obviously, he's not the longest hitter in this field, but he's been able to keep up with all these players just looking at his last few finishes. And so he's starting at 300 in this tournament. I think he just has I feel like he's a very steady player, so I think he can make a lot of movement up this leaderboard. So I really like him just at 7,300. Obviously, he is like almost 32% owned for good reason. With Louis Oosthuizen, I've got nothing against him and his game, but I just think you need someone who's feeling good and coming into it. I mean, we talked about him last week, and with his back injury, back, yeah. He's not someone that I'm going to be comfortable playing in a no-cut small field. So I just kind of shut him out, even though like he's not a bad player. I just don't really want someone who's potentially injured. And then for Brooks Koepka, I wanted to ask you about him because like I'm not entirely sure why I feel this way, but I feel like his game and how it looks doesn't seem to add up with how he's been scoring. Like his overall game looks solid, but he hasn't really been able to convert. And I was just wondering if you had anything to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, statistically, he looks good. He's gained off the tee in his last 15. He's ranked third in sand safe percentage in this field. When we look at what he's done at Eastlake, he has two top sixes in his last three tries. My model didn't necessarily love him, but like as we were talking with Spieth and Dustin, this is the guy I'd rather take a shot with. We have Dustin and Spieth over the $10,000 threshold with that. I think if I can save, $3,000 give or take on this, and I can go to a guy like Koepka, I think he provides a similar ceiling and floor as those two guys do. And he's not starting that much further back than they are. I mean, Koepka's starting at 2 under. So he's kind of in that same range that we're looking at. And I think that, good Eastlake record. I think he's good off the tee. I'd rather take a chance with him. And that's kind of why that like $10,000 range or like the low $10,000 range of the Spieth and Johnson and all those guys. I just think there's better pivots. Even if you drop down $3,000 and go to a guy like Koepka, like we're kind of looking at the same starting spot. And at that point, none of those guys have such a high built-in scoring total to begin with. So it's like, give me the guy that's only a shot or two behind them and $3,000 less. And we know Koepka's a big game hunter. So I like Koepka. I think Koepka's the guy I would rather pivot to open up some money from a guy like Spieth or Dustin. As far as Louis goes, if we look at all the injured golfers or the sick golfers or people that have something wrong with them. So let's say Morikawa, Reed, Spieth, Louis. I would say Louis is probably my favorite. Mostly that comes from him being under 15% owned. But last week at the BMW, he gained 2.3 shots with his irons. He had an aberrational result of losing 2.6 on the greens. He's the number one putter on tour. I think that's nothing more than just a quirky result that he had that's not going to necessarily happen again with it. It's a leverage play above anything else. And we've talked about it on the show for the reasons why I didn't like him the last couple weeks. He might pull out of the tournament. Like Louis pulls out of more tournaments than anybody else that's an elite player. Like maybe Kevin Na, maybe Jason Day, maybe Louis. Those are the three guys that continually seem to burn everybody. But I'm more worried about Louis burning me if he's like, 20 something percent owned in a normal 156 man field. At 13% owned, and he's one of the lower owned guys on the board, I think that's the spot where you can kind of gain an advantage. Like right now, he's only 24th in ownership out of 29 players that are currently being projected on my model with it. So I like Louis. I think for GPPs, he makes a lot of sense. I'd avoid him for cash games for just the withdrawal potential he has. And then you and I are both on the same page. We do this every single week with Sung Jae. And I have to say, it's been working correctly. Like he's not winning the tournament, but tournaments, but another really good result from Sung Jae. Last week, he's gained 2.5 shots off the tee over his last 4, 2.8 with his irons over his previous 8. He is going to be very popular at, 32, 33%, but he is one of the guys I bet at 35-1 to win when we removed the starting totals from the equation. So if everybody started from 0, Sung Jae Im 35-1 to win the golf tournament, which is kind of a wonky bet to make because Sung Jae could win that bet and not even know he won the bet. And that's what worries me about betting some of the favorites for it. But I think it makes sense at 35-1. Like if he posts a good tournament and he's putting himself into contention in the main tournament and he's not able to win, I think he should be putting himself in the contention to win this non-stroke play or non-starting stroke play part of it. So I really like Sung Jae. As I said, I kind of really just like everybody in this range though. Like you could talk me into everybody. I think for GPP, Sung Jae, Louis, Koepka, Hovland, English, Xander, they all make sense. Burns is probably more of a cash play for me, although I'm not discounting pretty much anybody here. So that's where I'm at. But let's wrap it up with these last handful of guys here. We'll go from the 6,800 range to the $5,000 range. We have Scotty Scheffler at 6,800, Jason Kokrak at 6,600, your boy Hideki at 6,400, Corey Connors at 6,200, Kevin Na at 6,000, Berger at 5,800, Joaquin Neiman at 5,600, Sergio Garcia at 5,400, Stuart Sink at 5,200, Billy Horschel at 5,100, and Eric Van Rooyen at 5,000. We'll run through all these guys from top to bottom. I mean, I think this is more of a hit and miss section than the other ones, but where are you at in this range?
Yeah, so surprisingly, my model really likes Scotty Scheffler. And so basically what I had on him was like, obviously last year, if you don't count the Starter, he finished second and he played really well. So he has good history on this course. And I honestly do kind of like him down here just because of his volatility and his ability to make a lot of birdies overall. And on top of that, I just feel like you have so many good players with like slightly higher price tags. So if you want to go with those players, you need to find someone at the bottom. And I feel like he actually might be a good play. That's definitely someone that I am keeping my eye on. Under him, Jason Kokrak. My model doesn't really like him, and I think it's kind of skewed that way just with how he's been kind of performing lately. I don't necessarily hate him here. He has a low ownership percentage as well, but I don't think that his iron game and just his game sets up well for this course. So I don't really know if he's going to make as big of a surge up the leaderboard as I would want to see from someone down in this range. After him, we have Hideki. I love him. Obviously, there's no way that he can win this tournament or based on that staggered start since he's starting at just 1 under. But his game is solid, and he is just a steady player, and he can make those birdies to at least vault him up into the middle of that leaderboard. So I guess in these first 3, I'd probably go with Hideki. Again, I'm probably biased though, so don't know what to say about that one. And then
let's stop there with those 3. Just so we can condense this a little bit. But I think you added a really good point with what you just said. when we get down into this section, these are not guys that are going to necessarily be able to win the tournament, but we don't need that from them. We need guys that can make birdies, guys that can put themselves up on the leaderboard. And we really are just looking for players that can steal that finishing position that they shouldn't necessarily have. I think Scotty Scheffler is a great example of that. Similar to Sung Jae, I also bet Scheffler at 25-1 to win the non-head start portion of the event. I think if we were looking for who's going to actually win it, like the Tour Championship, my money's probably on Rahm. I kind of like Finau. I haven't made a decision yet what I'm going to do with that. But I think Sung Jae and Scheffler are really good of guys that are going to be coming back from the pace or coming back from the back of the pack here. Scheffler ranks 7th in total driving, 5th in overall birdie or better percentage, and 7th in strokes gained around the green in his last 24 rounds. That 5th in overall birdie or better is what I really like to see. The 7th in total driving means he's going to hit fairways. He's going to have a little bit of distance to him. I think this is a really good setup. Kokrak, 10.5% owned right now. As you said, I'm kind of confused on what to do with him. I think he's a guy that it's not quite clicking for him the way that I would be hoping it would be leading into this point. He was being carried by the putter. The putter hasn't been as good recently. It's been fine in stretches, but the irons turned around a little bit at the BMW. He gained 3.4 shots there over 4 days. He's been good at East Lake in the past with the 9th on his record in 2019, and he is a good Bermuda player that can score on par fives. Really, if I'm playing him, it's because of the ownership, though. 10.5% is at least worth a look. I mean, that's about as low as you're going to get. But the thing is with that, I think I would rather play Hideki even with the ownership being about double at $6,400 for him. Hideki, has shown flashes at East Lake in the past. He has recorded 16 straight rounds of being par or better. These are difficult tests. And the one thing that I always like about Hideki is that when it's not a birdie fest, he doesn't need to make as many putts, which just makes a lot of sense. And so when you remove some of that bad putting from his game, and he's going to be able to, make par instead. And when he misses those birdie putts, he's going to give himself more opportunities. So then he will eventually make some when people are making mistakes. So I think Hideki makes a lot of sense. I think he's the guy that if we could ever get a good putting performance from him, we could see him shoot up the leaderboard. As you said, I don't think he can actually win the tournament, but this is a good $6,400 with his upside is a good chance to take on him here. But all right, let's go down to the bottom here. And just to reiterate these players one more time, it's Corey Connors at 6,200, Kevin Na at 6,000, Daniel Berger at 5,800, Joaquin Neiman at 5,600, Sergio Garcia at 5,400, Stuart Sink at 5,200, Billy Horschel at 5,100, and Eric Van Rooyen at 5,000.
Yeah, so when I got down into this range, I started to kind of look more at just who do I think can vault themselves off this leaderboard. So with that said, I mean, my model liked Daniel Berger and Sergio Garcia, but everyone else were ranked pretty low. Just starting with Corey Connors, I just didn't think he was a great pick because I don't feel like he can convert a lot of birdies. Like he hits a lot of greens, but he doesn't seem to convert those to birdies. And so his game seems pretty solid coming into this tournament, just with the top 10 and then a top 25. But I'm not his biggest fan here with like some of these other players down here. Kevin Na, I think he's playing solid golf right now. I do enjoy him simply because we know that he can get hot and he can make a lot of birdies and move up the leaderboard. But when he doesn't play that kind of golf, he usually falls back a lot. And so he's just not someone I'd be confident playing here in this tournament. As for Daniel Berger, obviously his ownership percentage is already at 31%, really high for someone down here, but I'm very intrigued by him and his stats. Not only are his par 3 and par 4 averages under par, but he hits over 70% of greens in regulation, which theoretically would put him at an advantage for making more birdies just because he gives himself a lot more birdie opportunities. So obviously he's starting at even par this tournament, so he's at a huge disadvantage. But I think if he can put together 4 solid rounds, he'd just be at the middle of the pack as we would expect. And then Joaquin Neiman, I'm not really blown away with how he's been playing lately or his stats. I do like that he's pretty accurate off the tee, which will help him on some of the narrow fairways here on this course. But his approaches aren't the greatest, and he doesn't really get a lot of birdie opportunities that he can take advantage of. So I wasn't his biggest fan. And then I'm trying to think. So Sergio Garcia was another one that my model liked down here. Obviously, he missed the cut at the Northern Trust, but then came back last week with the top 10. So I think his approach game and just his iron game, he can take advantage of some of the shorter par fours and give himself a good look at birdie. I just don't know if his game is strong enough to really move up a ton, which is what I'm looking for down here. And then with these last three players, I just was not sure where to go with them at all, really. So I might let you take these last three. I have no idea.
I'll start with the last three and I'll work my way up to Corey Connors with it. So yeah, Sink, Horschel, and Van Rooyen. They were the bottom three on my spreadsheet. I think Van Rooyen makes the most sense because of the 5th and 7th he has recorded entering the week. There are just other options I'd rather play unless I'm completely destitute for funds and I'm trying to, I mean, but even still, like, even if I'm completely destitute for funds, like, I'd rather play Sergio Garcia at $5,400. I'd rather play Joaquin Neiman at $5,600. I think you can play Berger at 58. Like, you'd have to really put yourself into a hole there where you don't really know how to get yourself out of it. And I think at that point, you're probably not making the correct build. Like Van Rooyen, probably the only one that makes sense. I mean, maybe Horschel. I think Sink's game has gone the wrong direction at this point. Like, at least Horschel has the upside. We've seen him compete at a WGC this year. He won the WGC match play. So he has had some success on, he's a former tour championship winner with it. I mean, those are all positives if you're trying to find it. So maybe Horschel, I guess, would be my favorite if you made me pick one of the three of it. Sergio at 5,400. I think he's probably, well, let's do Sergio and Neiman together. So I think Sergio is probably a little bit safer than Neiman if we're looking for a cash game play. But I agree with you. I'm a little bit worried of what his upside actually is being down this far down the board. I think he has playability in GPPs. I think I'd kind of rather play him for cash games, though. I think he's going to give you a safe, good finish. I just don't know if he can make the run that people think he's going to make also. 3rd on Donald Ross designs and 13th on Bermuda, 4th in GIR percentage. Those are all really good, but putter kind of bites him at the end of the day, and that's my biggest concern with him. Now, Neiman is a guy that I think if the short game turns around, he does have the explosiveness. And his birdie numbers and some of those numbers may not look impressive on paper, but when he gets hot in bunches and he makes birdies in bunches and he can go running up this leaderboard better than most guys can. So he's gained off the tee in 17 of 20 with his irons in 31 of 24. As I said, I love his explosiveness this far down the board in this range. So I am going to have a bunch of Neiman. It's going to be an erratic type pick for GPPs, but at 12%, there's a lot of upside there. As you mentioned with Berger, over 30% for a $5,800 golfer is a lot. Form hasn't been great either at Eastlake with the 17th, 15th, and 15th, but the two 15th place finishes in 2016 and 2017 will not show the type of player he is now. I think he's fine. I mean, really, it's just the ownership is really my only concern. If he was 22% owned rather than like 32% owned, I think there's more of a narrative that can be made. He is starting so far back that if he posts, a 4 under, I don't know how much he actually helps you out. And that's just from like a game theory standpoint. He may not have as much upside as the perception is around him. I haven't made a decision on him. My model likes him also. My model ranks him 15th, 11th for GPPs. Where does your model have him?
Yeah, I have him at 14th, so right around there.
Yeah, and I mean, that's great value on the surface, but, you have to kind of bake in that 31% also. So that would be my real concern with him, that I don't know if the upside's as good as it seems. Now, it is a par 70. I always think he's better on par 70s. This is a longer par 70, though, so it's not like a Pebble Beach type event where he's going to be able to have shorter irons in and stuff. I still think the irons will come from a longer distance. Kevin Knott, 6,000. You're correct in the sense that when Na gets hot, he's able to like win tournaments that he shouldn't necessarily win, and he's able to make birdies in bunches, and he's able to do things like that. But he has been awful here. 3 over, 2 over, 13 over in his last 3. That's a concern. I would just rather kind of play somebody else in that range. Like go up to a Decky for $400 more is kind of where my mind's at with it, even with the ownership percentage. And then Corey Connors at 6,200. He's the number 1 player in accuracy plus off the tee in my model. Unfortunately, he ranks second to last in par 5 scoring. I think the ownership is close enough between him and Hideki that I would once again just rather play Hideki. So in this range, I really like Scotty Scheffler. I think Scotty Scheffler can make a run back here. I think Scotty Scheffler can come in the top 5-10 of this tournament, even with where he's starting. I think Kokrak, from a contrarian standpoint, you can maybe make an argument. I think Hideki's ownership at 23% is a lot, but I think this is a good setup for him. Connors is fine. Nah, I'm out on Berger. It's going to be a tough decision. And then, Neiman, Sergio, I like. Sink, Horschel, Van Rooyen, I'm probably out on. I don't know if you have anything else to say with that range.
No, I think I pretty much agree with you. Like the people that I really like down here, Scotty Scheffler, Hideki, Berger, and then Garcia, and those are the ones that my model likes the most too. So I'm kind of actually for once agreeing with my model down here and not trying to talk myself out of things.
Yeah, I think from an overall standpoint, if we just go to the top of the or to the complete board at this point, some players I like who aren't the favorite. So let's exclude all like the top guys in this. Really like Sung Jae. He's going to be popular, but I really can't say a bad thing about Sung Jae. I really like Scheffler. I think he's going to be very popular, but those are two guys that I kind of am fine eating the chalk down here and just living with it. I like English. I like Hovland. I like Neiman. I like Louis. And then up top, probably Rahm and Thomas are my preferred two plays in that $11,000 and up range. Where are you at?
Yeah, I was going to say up top, I was looking at Rahm and Justin Thomas as well. And then I also didn't really like that kind of $10,000, $9,000 range. I wasn't a huge fan of those players. Moving down, where was I? Oh, I liked Xander. I liked Hovland. Definitely love Sung Jae here. Scotty Scheffler, I think, definitely someone that I want to really think about and probably will end up playing. Hideki, and then obviously already went down past him. So those are definitely, I think we're kind of picking some of the same people.
I think we are too. We only have 29 players to pick from, obviously 30 if Patrick Reed gets thrown back into the equation here, but there's only so many routes you can go. Like at the end of the day, I guess my biggest piece of advice is don't be afraid to leave some money on the table. I think that's one way you can differentiate your build. I don't think you need to spend all the salary that you're being given. And that's especially if you're playing like a lot of the chalk. I think if you play the chalk and you leave, $1,000, $2,000+ on the board, you can differentiate your build just by doing that. I think that's one way to do it. I would be unique with my build as much as possible. As I said, there's only 29 players. You only can get so unique with it. I really think the salary left over is one of the ways to do it. And other than that, kind of just, I'm just going to go with my model. I'm going to try to figure out where ownership is and try to figure out an optimal way to play this. And, once you get past the top couple guys in this, I think the win equity diminishes drastically. So I'm not looking as much for the win equity once I get past, I don't know. I mean, we'll give Justin Thomas the credit here at 4 under par and say he has a chance to win this. But I think really the 5 unders and up have the best chance. The 4 unders have an outside chance. And then lower than that, you're going to need a collapse at the top of the board from people. And now the thing I will say to that is, I think that it is realistic that you could get a collapse up top. Like Cantlay's not been good here. Finau, you never know what you're going to get necessarily. I mean, $15 million is on the line. Yes, he did just finally close the tournament, but doing it again might be a problem. DeChambeau's volatile. He could be in or out of the tournament. I think Rahm is safe. I think I would be shocked if Rahm wasn't 12, 13 under par by the time this ended at the bare minimum. So if you're looking at that, you're going to really need some of these guys, to go 12, 13, 14, 15 under to overtake a total like that. And I think Rahm has the potential to be better than that. So I think Rahm is safe. I think Cameron Smith has some upside. And yeah, as I said, like that 4 under range, at least you have the upside and the volatility of like guys like Thomas and Spieth. But past that, you're going to need an epic collapse from everybody.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think just with the staggered start, it's going to be really hard to figure out who's going to come out on top, and it's something you're going to have to almost like just pick and hope, I guess, because it can really go any which way, as you just said. But this is really interesting. I'm kind of excited just because this is like my first year starting to kind of do DraftKings and stuff to like see how it goes with a tournament that's as weird as this. So I'm intrigued.
Yeah, and like this is I guess for me, this is one of my least favorite tournaments just with the way it's set up, but there are ways to try to get unique. The problem is there's just not enough players to get super unique with it. So, um, my guess another piece of advice, I would just be careful with how much exposure I actually put down onto the table. And that even goes for outright betting. Like I've hit 3 in a row, so I'm probably going to take a stance this week more so than I normally would because I kind of like where my model's at in certain spots with it. But, mostly if you're looking at this from the staggered starting scores, like Rahm is 5-1 to win this tournament. There's such a big exposure that's going to have to be put out there immediately to bet guys like this that it's kind of hard to bet multiple players and all of a sudden your exposure gets up really fast. And I know this is more of a DFS show than a betting show, but it still kind of proves the point. Like you just have to be careful because exposure adds up quickly when everybody is like sub 12-1 up in that range. But that'll do it for the show this week. Josephine, where can everybody find you?
Yeah, so everyone can find me at jchang1020 on Instagram and Twitter. And then obviously you can find me and Spencer together at Be the Number Pod on Instagram and Twitter as well. And then Spencer, I guess you just made an Instagram for yourself. Do you want to let everyone know where that's at?
Yeah, I just made an Instagram. It's the same place or the same handle that I have on Twitter. It's at TOffSports. So on Twitter at TOffSports, on Instagram at TOffSports. Thank you once again for everybody who keeps tuning in and listening. The support has been overwhelming with the number of views we're getting. So Josephine and I can't thank everybody enough for that. If you have any questions, be sure to hit her up on all the handles she mentioned. You can hit us up together at Be the Number Pod. You'll get a response from one of us. And as I said, you can hit me up at TOffSports on Instagram or Twitter. So good luck, everybody, this week. If you have any questions, be sure to shoot me a message. But let's try to make some money once again. Good luck, guys.